We're going to go ahead and get started, and I'd like to welcome everybody that had the time to come over to this KM panel discussion, specifically the real live knowledge management. Just a little bit of an orientation. Can you go to the next chart, please? This is our panel construct that you've all seen in the outline of the LandWarNet Track 9 conference. We do have to note that Mr. Lewis, because of the events related to the hurricane and the earthquake yesterday, was not able to get here. So the panel members that you see here are the rest of the representatives, and we'll have a good session. Just give us more time to talk. We will go through the introductions of each panel member in a few minutes. We will have a question and answer period embedded towards the end of the 5 questions that each panel member will respond to. And as we go through, I think we've got some great topics that will elicit thoughts. Capture your questions or comments for later towards the end. And we will have a large virtual audience that is right now using SKN Live to watch the same presentation, and they'll be afforded the opportunity to ask questions as well. So with that said, we're going to get started. The first thing I'd like to do is go to the next chart. This is an opportunity for our panel members to introduce themselves, their mission, their organizations, and some of the priorities that they have on their plates in terms of hotspots. And we'll start off with Mr. Moore from CASCOM.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Bill Moore. I'm the Deputy to the Commanding General of the Combined Armed Support Command in Fort Lee, Virginia, as part of the Army. Basically the Chief of Operations for the CASCOM in Fort Lee. What we do for the Army is essentially train soldiers, develop leaders, and then develop future capabilities for our parts of the Army that we're responsible for. And that's basically all things sustainment. So quartermaster or supply, ordnance, which is mostly about maintenance, transportation, finance, personnel, and then we integrate some other functions for the Army like medical and chaplains and lawyers and things like that. When I look at our customer base, so to speak, it's about 1/3 of the Army that we train and develop leaders and develop capabilities for across all 3 components, with a fairly significant amount of civilians and contractors that also support the mission. When I add all that up, it's approximately 450,000 folks that we have to deal with that are really our shareholders and all that. Now, what I'd like to gain from participating in this panel, frankly, I'm very honored to even be on the panel. I view myself and our organization as a user of KM, two PhDs and a renowned author and me on this panel, so I'm feeling pretty good about even being up here. But frankly, we are a user. When I first stood up a KM shop in CASCOM about 4 years ago, I was sort of in the mode of, I don't know what this KM stuff is, but I want some of it, you know. And essentially, since then, what it's become is a huge enabler for what we do for the Army. And I'm looking forward to learning even more from these experts and keep adjusting and refining how we utilize it within the missions of our command.
Next, we'll hear from Ms. Cindy Hubert from APQC.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cindy Hubert. I'm the Executive Director at APQC, and I'm responsible for our delivery services. For those of you who may not know APQC, we are an American Productivity and Quality Center. It's our long name. We are a research-based organization, and we do, our mission is to find best practices and bring them to bear on problems, disseminate them, and also help our members network. So we're a membership-based organization. I think our members come to us really for 3 reasons that they align with our mission. One is to get data and proven practices. What have people done, what have they tried, and what's been proven, so that we can take and replicate that without recreating the wheel. The other thing that they come to us for are frameworks and models and ways to think about more complex topics like knowledge management. We've been researching and doing practical application of knowledge management solutions around strategy and processes and approaches for about 18 years now. And the third thing we do is very much in line with what I said our mission was about, which is to help people network. So we bring people together in various forms of fashion, whether it's virtual or face-to-face, at conferences like this, consortium studies where people come to study particular topics. I was telling Mike, like product development and knowledge and how that comes together. So we, and our membership is global. It's about 30% government and military, and we also reach outside of just the U.S. base with about 30% international members. So it's very nice to be with you guys today. Why do I want to be here? I like to take real issues that you're dealing with, no matter how small you may think they are. They tend to grow up and get big and get more complex. And so it's to try to understand what your issues are and how the things that we've learned over the last few years, you can use those to be agile and quickly work your way through this topic of knowledge management.
Thank you. Now we've got Dr. Mike Stankowski from George Washington University.
Thank you, Pat. I worry about being invited on any panel after lunch. You never give a professor the after lunch. I spent 26 years as a professional killer in the Marine Corps. Can't say I ever left it because you never leave the Marine Corps. Spent about 8 years as an executive in high-tech companies, and now I'm in my 14th year at the university. I'm a professor of systems engineering and engineering management, two fields of study. How I came to KM and why we're talking about it, I'll kind of leave a lot of it to my panel discussion. But I decided 14 years ago that if somehow we didn't create an academic discipline for KM, it's not going to make it. Because people don't go to school to learn, they go to get a degree. And that learning is secondary. If you don't get the degree, you don't go to school. That's your currency of the 21st century. And when KM came across my desk, I said, why KM? I know I'm looking at the gentleman over here who said you can't manage KM. We'll talk about that, because if you can't manage your strategic asset, you're out to lunch. But we'll talk about why KM and definitions and stuff like that and why I got into it. But currently, I created about 14 years ago what is considered, at least in America, the first master's and doctorate and graduate certificate in KM. And I created an institute. I'm in the School of Engineering and Applied Science with my colleagues in the School of Business, an Institute for Knowledge and Innovation. And it's a global network of people. We produced 30 doctors in 10 years in KM. One is sitting there in the audience. He just joined the Army. I tried to talk her out of it, but in any event, you got to know Diana Ascent. She's really a powerhouse in this area. So I'll leave my more remarks for later on, but I am excited to be here amongst my colleagues. Thank you.
And finally, we're followed by Dr. Dan Kirsch from KM Pro.
Hi, Dr. Dan, for those who know me. I feel like I've got about half the audiences from my classes and familiar faces. So hi, everybody. I'm with KM Pro. KM Pro is the only nonprofit international professional society dedicated to serving those in the knowledge management community. We try to support knowledge management and push the best practice of that, and then also try to give folks a community to be able to participate. My personal background in KM is I've been doing this about 20 years. Started when I was in the Navy and has kind of gone on since then. So like a movie that just never leaves town. Pat had asked also if we had any hot rocks, and I don't think anybody else has tossed out a hot rock specifically, so I'm going to toss mine out. Mine has to do with what I think is probably one of our biggest challenges in knowledge management. I hope we'll get a chance to talk about it today. Is that I think that we have not had leadership really buy into knowledge management yet. They bought into IT, they bought into IT thingies, but not knowledge management. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, we're going to move on to our first question, our challenge for the panel, if you will. And go ahead and migrate to the next chart. And basically what this is designed to do is talk about this thing we know as the knowledge economy. So specifically, the question posed to the panel, has the knowledge economy impacted the way individuals and organizations use and manage knowledge? And our first stuckey, if you will, is Dr. Dan Kirsch.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an obvious one. For those who haven't caught up yet, the industrial age is dead. So we're here in the knowledge age and working inside the knowledge economy. Probably one of the biggest things that I think is a good point for how this works is perhaps another way to look at defining knowledge management. I like to think of it as possibly managing our uniqueness. The only thing that makes any organization in this day and age is its organizational knowledge, the knowledge that the people have. And so at the end of the day, if you have not done something with that inside of our knowledge economy, then what have you got left? So if IT is your KM strategy, at the end of the day, you have no strategy. And if you think you can't manage knowledge, then you're not using your unique knowledge, and unique knowledge takes us to innovation, and we're all probably familiar with innovate or die. So I think that's where we are. You have to be innovative in this current age that we're in, or you don't survive long.
Mr. Moore?
Well, the short answer is yes, it has, absolutely. And then our organization, which one of our 3 basic missions is to develop leaders. I mean, we develop leaders by conveying knowledge into their brains so they can use it to lead people and soldiers and to do certain things for the nation. And so the knowledge economy has impacted that to a great degree. I'd have to say at this point, it's really done it more informally than where I want to take it, which is a more institutionalized approach that looks at industrial age processes that we still have to live inside the Army and bring those processes to the 21st century. And I'll use actually a personal example to make that point. I was trying to teach my 10-year-old son how to change a tire a few months ago. And basically about halfway through it, he was getting pretty bored. Because kids get real bored when you try to teach them things like that. And he looked at me and he's like, "Dad, can't I just pull down the app for that if I ever need to change the tire?" And I was like, "No, son, you'll be in an area that doesn't have coverage." He didn't buy that. But I mean, it's that learning at the point of need thing that I think we can better incorporate. And I look at our programs of instruction, which is how we set up our courses and teach. I mean, we have over 500 courses that we teach within the CASCOM organizations and schools. And each of those POIs is based on what we think the critical learning objectives need to be for those soldiers or civilians. And I got to bring that into the 21st century. What can we deliver to them in their duty station versus what we need to deliver to them in the schoolhouse. So it's a big challenge, and it takes a lot of time and effort to re-engineer that, but that's where I want us to go. So back to the question, it has impacted it. I think it is just scratching the surface of how it could impact it and revolutionize how we do what we do.
Dr. Stankowski?
Well, I'm going to take a different approach here. I don't think we know what we're doing in a knowledge-based economy. I've been at this for 14 years. Actually, I've been at it a lifetime because a knowledge-based economy is nothing new. We just never gave it that name. But I was up at Microsoft many years ago with Tom Davenport and Buckman from Buckman Labs. And I had 125 executives in front of me. And I asked, if I came into your office tomorrow and looked at your assets that you use to manage your company, would you give me a list? Now, these are pretty senior executives responsible by law, by every known morality on the planet to get return on assets. And not one had a clue as to what I was talking about. Not one had an inventory. If I go into the office today, they still don't. And we just don't know how to manage knowledge because we don't know what knowledge is. And we still think it's people. I remember this morning someone said that technology, it's all about technology, and they said, no, it ain't. Well, it is all about technology. I remember a long time ago someone said KM in the early days, and this was the first CKO in the government, that KM was about people, process, and technology, and people were the most important thing. And I said, Shireen, you're kidding me. How could that happen? I said, let me take away your technology and see how important people will be. Let me take away the reservation system for Delta. And they're out of business. They're all equally important. We just don't know how to balance them all and weave them together. We always have a tendency to criticize one amongst the critical elements. It's like me asking you what's more important, your heart system or your nervous system. We don't use a systems approach in the way we do things. We're in a knowledge-based economy. What does that mean? A lot of people don't know it. I just came from Russia. They're trying to create a knowledge-based economy, switch from a carbon-based economy. But they don't know what they're doing. They're doing it, but they don't know what they're doing. We're all here doing it, but we do not know what we're doing. What is a knowledge-based economy? Well, we have a GDP of $14.7 trillion. Staggering. I don't even know how to calculate that like a nanosecond. 80% of our output is produced by knowledge. It's raw material for the 21st century. I have a Murano. I didn't pay $40,000 for it. It has more software in it than the shuttle that went to the moon. 65% of the cost of that car is nothing but knowledge assets. So I don't think we really have a clue yet. And look at all of our experts from Washington. We're still running our macroeconomic models on an industrial-based model. We don't get it. I was in the Marine Corps for 26 years. We had knowledge, I mean, that's how we used in the Marine Corps. We're always borrowing stuff and stealing it from the Army to prosecute a war. But our knowledge got us ahead of the game. So I honestly don't think we get it today. I wish Tom Stewart's book was a bestseller. If you know Tom, he's one of the pioneers. He used to do the management thing in Fortune. He was at Harvard. He's now over at Booz Allen making a fortune. But he wrote a book called The Wealth of Knowledge. And he was very emphatic that knowledge is your personal organizational wealth, national wealth. But we don't know what it is. We don't have a name for it. We're doing risk management without evaluation. Someone asked me a couple of years ago, Mike, the government's going to lose 50% of the workforce by the year, blah, blah, blah. What do you think? I had no clue. Trash could be walking out the door. Until you give something a name and value it, you can't do risk management. You can't return on your assets in a company. So I'll just leave that as openers. I don't want to become that professor who gets paid for words even after lunch. So I'll just leave that as a teaser and we'll move on.
They're all still laughing. They're laughing. You know,
Ms. Huber?
all right, thank you. So yes, it has changed. But I think, I'm going to build on something a gentleman said from the earlier session. He was talking about information overload. And I just think the fact that we do live in an age where we are overwhelmed with the amount of information that we can access or that gets pushed to us. I mean, you have RSS feeds coming at you every day. You signed up for them, probably. And it gets to be overwhelming. So I think that because of the notion that knowledge has a higher value than information, you can't have knowledge without information, but it has a higher value, heightens our awareness of what needs to happen with our knowledge. And I agree with the rest of this panel. I think we're still in the middle of a transformation and not exactly knowing how to deal with all the things that are required to manage this asset called knowledge. So if you go back to the definition we used in the earlier session, if information is knowledge, and I had a discussion with Colonel Sutton, so unless people take the information and use it, really think about what use means. Does it mean a decision is made? Does it mean an improvement happens? Does it mean there's a course correction? Until that happens, it isn't knowledge. And we had a debate over lunch about just the types of knowledge, because I mentioned this morning there's explicit and tacit, and APQC just tends to classify knowledge in those two buckets. Recognizing in our research that the tacit has been the one that appears to be much more valuable because it's what people know, who they know, their relationships, as Mike said earlier. But the explicit is important too, so you've got to have both of those, and I think that's where in our knowledge economy we're still thinking about how we manage. People are, if you haven't seen a PBS special called Public Broadcast System, special called Digital Nation, it was phenomenal. We saw it last year or 18 months ago and literally had to stop every 2 minutes to think about what it was saying, because it's talking about the immersion that we have with digital, that most people have 4 to 5 to 6 screens in front of them every day. I walked down the hall earlier and I told Pat, I said, we're supposed to be at a conference networking and talking, and everyone is behind their computer. And again, it gets back to, it may be a necessity. Work these days is a 24-hour job, and it doesn't go away. Maybe it never did before either, but we just didn't recognize it as always being connected. And our generation that's coming up has always been connected. They don't know what it means. And so I think skills like, to help us deal with how we manage and think about knowledge, is we're going to need a different skill set around critical thinking, analytics, talking about Tom Davenport, all the analytics work that's being on, teaching people how to really understand and look at information and make sense of it, and then know that it's going to change in the very next moment.
Thank you. Okay, given the responses to the knowledge economy question, let's go to number 2. Is there a relationship between knowledge management, or knowledge flows, if you will, and individual and organizational learning? And we're going to start off with
I think it's a tenuous one. I often heard people, in my opinion, confuse knowledge management with the learning organization. When I joined my company, they paid me a nice salary. I came out of the Marine Corps one day next as a vice president with a nice salary. They didn't hire me to learn. They hired me for my knowledge assets. Now let me be careful with this. They didn't hire me for my individual knowledge assets, which is, when we talk about knowledge assets, there's 3 major categories that are seemingly accepted now, closer than anything I've ever seen around the world. If you talk knowledge or intellectual capital, you're talking about human capital, which most of us focus in on, and that only represents about 20% of the knowledge assets of an organization. We talk about organizational capital, which represents about 30 to 35%. The organizational know-how. You bring in a new lieutenant, he comes in with his own knowledge, but he really is coming into an organization that has a lot of historical, operational knowledge that they imbued him with. But the real thing that SAIC hired me for is my relationship capital, which is a third part of knowledge assets. And that represents about 40 to 50% of an organization's knowledge wealth. So we often focus in on human capital. We don't really, and of course we're seeing this now with Web 2.0, the relationship capital is really what's powerful here. But you still need the organizational capital with, Wikipedias and the Googles. I mean, those people are on the codification side, the Web 2.0 are on the collaboration side. Okay? When they hired me, no one sat down to interview me on my assets. No one said, well, we're going to teach you, Mike, even though I did get my doctorate when I was there, but you're not here, you're here to perform. The day I walked in, you're here to perform. When you walk into the Army, yeah, they're going to teach you, but you better start performing. If you're a colonel and you come to your next organization, they're not here to teach you, you're here to perform. So don't confuse learning with leveraging knowledge. When I came in, they gave me my benefit package, but no one ever inventoried my knowledge in those 3 categories. They had no clue. And if I left the next day, they would have been out of that asset. We don't spend time inventorying what our assets are. When I went to the university, they found out I could teach 30 subjects. They only thought I could teach 2. We don't leverage our knowledge because we don't know what it is. So in my opinion, I think we often confuse the two of learning, and because knowledge is stuff already available. We just got to figure out what it is and who has it and how do we use it today. And then from it, we do learn and innovate, but that's not the purpose of knowledge management. It's using it today.
Dr. Kirsch?
I think I'm going to take a slightly divergent path, but one that might intersect a little bit. I'd like to make the case for knowledge management having a direct relationship to organizational learning, specifically the learning organizational concept. I think that one of the things that we've learned from knowledge management is that knowledge management will help us take the knowledge we have and then identify new opportunities to learn. And then those new opportunities to learn will then result in additional knowledge. And it's very much a cyclical kind of thing. What we're trying to do in most organizations is a little something that Tom Davenport referred to, I think was one of the first people, knowledge advantage, where you try to balance organizational learning and then the knowledge management effort. And And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to maximize your ability to be able to do both. If you're just good at learning, but not so good at getting new knowledge, you're sort of like the goldfish syndrome. Are you familiar with that? Where every 20 seconds it's, hey, look, it's a castle. Hey, look, it's a castle. You know, really not getting much done. So if you don't have that trade-off and that balance, if you're using your learning to get to new knowledge, use that knowledge to then learn from it, then I think we're missing what provides for us one of our bigger competitive advantages. So a goal that knowledge management, I think, has related to organizational learning is to ensure that knowledge that we've already got becomes accessible so that anybody who needs it and can learn from it is able to do so. And then the second side of it is to make sure that we're using knowledge to actually achieve innovations. Again, it's innovate or die. And that's where our innovation comes from. It comes from new knowledge. It doesn't come from existing knowledge. If you're familiar with the knock-on the seeking model, it's been around for a little bit, but I think that's a really good model that indicates the process, how we move from explicit to tacit knowledge and then back and forth again. And that drives home the point of learning how that ties in place. But KM certainly supports everything from organizational learning to on-the-job training, formal education, and things like that. It's all part of that knowledge conversion process.
I'd like to make a codicil here. I didn't say it doesn't lead to that. I just said that it's not the end point right now. The starting point is to perhaps coming up with a definition of knowledge management before we discuss this, because my definition is a lot different than most people's, and there's 100 out there, if not more. So maybe we're talking about a subject that is so gaseous that any answer will get you there, you know?
That's 30 seconds on your tab. Ms. Heward?
So, I'll do 30 seconds now. All right. Knowledge, so we think there's a strong connection between the two. Here's the connection. Knowledge management helps you operationalize the goal of becoming a learning organization. And you have to think about what is a learning organization. And as Dan just said, it's one that can take information, can take knowledge at any moment, and people can use that to do something to impact the work that they're doing. When you look at, APQC picked up on the phrase over a dozen years ago, the teachable moment. And, the teachable moment is one where you learn and where knowledge can support that learning moment, where you're most open, you're most vulnerable to needing to know something, and that's when it sticks. Now, if there's not a base of understanding or a foundation of the topic or the domain, sometimes it doesn't stick. That's where memory sometimes comes in, or your experiences pick up, and until it moves from the front part of the brain to the back part of the brain, it doesn't, the expertise isn't there. So when you look at how knowledge management can help people learn, and it is providing different venues for that learning, whether it is the training where you have people that are listening to fundamentals and building understanding, common definitions, or whether you are on the job and you're needing some type of a system or a process to push knowledge to you, or that you can pull from it readily to react or to make a difference in something that you're doing. IBM is using a lot of the social media tools to really make in what they're calling informal learning, but it's really learning on the job and using those tools to help push information out to them. So we're seeing a very strong relationship between the two, and you've got to define the audiences because it's not one size fits all.
Mr. Moore?
Well, from a user perspective, I can tell you absolutely there is a relationship, at least the way we conceive and utilize what we call KM. But when I mentioned earlier that we set up that office 4 years ago, their job one was to build something we call the Sustainment Knowledge Network, which is sort of a social network that used in a professional way. But this knowledge network the goal was to link that 450,000 person audience that I mentioned earlier, and basically try to link those who need